We now move from concept to execution. The slides gave us a simple language. Product suite will show how the same idea becomes a connected product journey. The important thing is not the number of tools on the screen. We are not doing a menu tour. We are following one idea as it evolves. Challenge, evidence, product definition, experience, roadmap, delivery, outcomes, and proof. Watch how each step produces information that becomes an input to the next decision. Here is the route we will follow. We start with the challenge, then listen to people through survey evidence, synthesize the signals, validate the market question, challenge viability, define the product, design the journey, create the roadmap, hand the work into delivery, and finally measure outcomes and evidence. This sequence is useful because it mirrors a real product story. It also gives us clear stopping points. If the evidence is weak, we do not need to rush to a PRD. If viability is poor, we can revise the idea before engineering starts. The software is supporting decisions, not simply generating documents. This is the guided entry point. Notice that it is framed around a journey rather than around isolated tools. Explore, plan, and hand off. That matters because a beginner can easily get lost in a product stack by asking, which tool should I open? The better question is, what decision am I trying to make next? The adoption checklist also makes progress visible. We can see whether we have chosen a persona, run research, reviewed signals, created the product brief, and prepared the build package. The system is reinforcing the same logic we have just learned on the slides. Recording queue, hold on the guided start screen long enough for viewers to see explore, plan, handoff, and the adoption checklist. This is the Circular Cup project workspace. Instead of seeing a folder full of disconnected files, we can see the product artifacts together. Technical specification, wireframe, sprint plan, PRD, journey map, market research, and other outputs. The important word here is connected. A good product operating model should let us move from an insight to a decision to a requirement to a delivery item without losing the reason why the work exists. That traceability becomes especially valuable later when someone asks, why did we put this in the roadmap? Or which evidence supports this product claim? Recording queue, point to the connected outputs in the Circular Cup workspace. Avoid opening every artifact here. The first demo step is deliberately simple. We enter the challenge as reduce disposable takeaway cup waste. We do not enter build an app. That distinction protects us from locking the solution too early. At this stage, the product may eventually involve software, but it may also involve service design, payment rules, operations, or physical infrastructure. Starting with the challenge creates space to discover the right mechanism. This is the first practical habit to take away from the demo. Capture the problem in a way that leaves the solution open. On this screen, the research wizard asks plain English questions. What are we exploring? Who is the user? What pains should the research test? And which market or segment should we compare against? This is useful because the system is forcing the idea to become specific. We cannot hide behind a phrase like circular economy platform. We need to name the customer and the pain. For our example, the user is the takeaway coffee customer and the pain is the inconvenience of reusable alternatives. That specificity is what will make the later research and product definition useful. Recording queue, highlight the plain English fields. Emphasize challenge/user/problem before market or competitor fields. Now the challenge has been translated into a concrete brief. We can see the proposed product area, the Circular Cup borrow and return service, the primary customer, the problem statement, and the market context. Notice that even though a product concept is now visible, the brief still describes the problem we want to test. Customers want to reduce disposable cup use, but remembering, carrying, and washing their own cups creates friction. There is a much better research starting point than asking the market whether it likes our pre-selected app idea. Recording queue, briefly point to customer, problem, and market in the generated brief. Here the market research output begins to turn the challenge into an evidence-backed brief. The findings are very practical. Return points need to fit existing customer routines, limited return networks create friction, hygiene matters, and refund timing affects trust. The key output is not the amount of text. It is the decision implication. Test a small three-cafe borrow and return pilot with an instant refund rather than jumping into a broader rewards or marketplace program. Research is useful when it narrows the next decision. Recording cue, pause on findings, then move to decision implication. That is the teaching focus. Now we listen to the people who experience the problem. A handful of simple statements can already reveal a lot. I forget my reusable cup. I would return one if it was easy. I do not want another app. A deposit is fine if the refund is instant. These comments are not requirements yet, they are evidence. We want to look for recurring patterns rather than overreacting to one quote. In this case, the patterns point toward convenience, return locations, deposit trust, and hygiene. Those themes will shape what the product must do well. Survey intelligence gives us a reusable evidence source rather than a one-time conversation. The point is not to automate empathy. The point is to capture and structure what people are telling us so that it can be revisited later. In a real program, this could include surveys, interviews, support logs, field notes, or partner feedback. Once the source is preserved, later decisions can link back to it. That means the product team does not have to rely on memory or on the loudest stakeholder in the room. Recording cue show that the survey brief is stored as a reusable output. These raw responses are useful because they show the friction in the customer's own words. Slow refunds make a deposit feel like a hidden fee. Washing cups at home is one reason people stop reusing. A stained cup creates a hygiene concern even if the process is technically safe. Extra steps at the till can push someone back toward a disposable cup. These are small details, but products succeed or fail in small moments. The sustainability goal is broad. Adoption is decided in seconds. We want the product to remove friction at those moments. Recording cue, scroll through a few raw comments. Do not read every response. Once the responses are grouped, the signal becomes much clearer. Convenience is rising as a negative theme. Return locations are a positive opportunity. Deposit trust is stable but depends on immediate refund. Hygiene is a concern that requires visible reassurance. This is where research starts becoming usable for product work. Instead of saying customers care about sustainability, we can say customers are more likely to participate when returns fit existing routines, refund is immediate, and cleanliness is visible. That statement can influence scope and design, recording cue, pause on convenience, return locations, deposit trust, and hygiene. The next step is synthesis. Product teams rarely receive one neat source of truth. They receive surveys, interview snippets, support notes, observations, and sometimes market signals that disagree with one another. Signal synthesis is about finding the pattern across those sources. Our product insight is simple. People will reuse cups if returning them is easier than carrying and managing their own. That is more actionable than a pile of comments. It gives us a hypothesis that can be tested in the product. This screen shows the evidence registry. Signals are not only stored, they can carry source, confidence, observed date, and decision context. That is important because evidence has quality. A fresh observation from 10 cafes should not be treated exactly the same as a 3-year-old anecdote. By making the source and confidence visible, the team can discuss evidence rather than arguing from authority. It also lets us see which signals are already connected to decisions and which ones still require action. Recording cue, point to source, confidence, observed date, and decision status. The theme view helps us see where decision pressure is accumulating. For circular cup, return locations, convenience, deposit trust, and hygiene appear alongside other themes in the wider product environment. The exact numbers are less important than the behavior of the system. It allows us to see clusters, confidence, and open decision pressure. For a product manager, that is valuable because prioritization should not depend only on how often an idea is mentioned. We also care about evidence strength, urgency, and the consequence of getting the decision wrong. Recording cue, use the theme cards to show clustering, avoid explaining every unrelated theme. Here the synthesis becomes a direct product implication. The input signals tell us that people forget reusable cups, want convenient return points, dislike unnecessary applications, care about refund speed, and notice hygiene. The resulting V1 is narrow. Borrow, pay a refundable deposit. Use, return at a participating cafe and receive an instant refund. No rewards, no additional app, no carbon dashboard. This is a good example of evidence reducing scope. Good research does not always produce more features. Often it gives us the confidence to build less. Recording queue, pause on the decision implication section and read the V1 scope aloud. Before we commit to a build, we use market validation to answer only the questions that can change the next decision. What makes returnable cup systems convenient? Which adoption barriers recur? Which deposit or pricing models create friction? We are not trying to write a 50-page market report. That would be easy to confuse with progress. The objective is to reduce uncertainty around the pilot. If the research tells us that instant refund and cross-location returns are critical, those become design requirements. If it reveals a major operational barrier, we may change the pilot before spending further. This screen shows the validation framed around explicit questions. That framing is important. Generic market research often creates interesting information but weak decisions. Here we are asking targeted questions because we already know what we need to decide next. The research has a job. Confirm or challenge the proposed pilot. A useful habit is to write the decision first. Should we test a three-café borrow and return model and then ask what evidence would increase or decrease confidence in that decision? Recording queue, focus on the three explicit validation questions. The findings now narrow the pilot. Convenience depends on return points fitting existing routines. Adoption barriers include network limits, hygiene concerns, deposit complexity, and slow refunds. Cross-location returns improve convenience but introduce washing and redistribution requirements. The decision implication is therefore concrete. Test the small pilot, keep the refund immediate, and do not expand into a broader rewards program yet. This is what validation should do. Change the shape of the decision, not simply decorate it with research. Recording queue, focus on findings and the decision implication for a three-café pilot. A product can be desirable and still fail because the operating model does not work. So now we challenge viability. We use simple teaching assumptions. A cup costs 120 rupees. The deposit is 150. Cleaning costs 4 rupees per use. Loss rate is 8%. The target is 40 reuse cycles and the pilot runs in 3 cafes. The question is not whether these numbers are perfect. The question is whether the first version is operationally credible enough to test and which assumptions are most dangerous if they are wrong. This viability screen puts the assumptions and delivery context in one place. We can see that the assessment is for the circular cup pilot and that the current state is ready for a decision but still needs recalculation as assumptions change. This is a useful product behavior. The system does not silently treat assumptions as facts. It makes the teaching values visible and links them to a decision. In a real product, we would want the same discipline around volume, unit economics, support load, security effort, and adoption cost. Recording queue, point to the visible teaching assumptions and delivery mode context. Here the viability work becomes a governed decision artifact. This matters because product teams often make a go or no-go decision in a meeting and then lose the reasoning. 6 weeks later, the roadmap contains the feature, but nobody can explain which assumptions were accepted. A decision record changes that. We can capture that the pilot is proceeding under what conditions and with which assumptions still requiring validation. The product then carries its own history rather than relying on tribal knowledge. Recording queue, emphasize the executive decision artifact rather than the cost detail controls. The assumptions editor makes the cost model inspectable. We can see build effort, quality and integration effort, support, infrastructure and other inputs rather than receiving one mysterious total. That transparency is important. Estimates are not truth, they are structured assumptions. If the cleaning cost doubles or the loss rate is higher than expected, the viability picture changes. If the pilot requires much more support than planned, the operating model changes. Product managers do not need to become accountants, but they do need to understand which assumptions drive the decision. Recording queue, scroll just enough to show that assumptions are editable and auditable. We now have enough evidence to define the product. The PRD should not be a creative writing exercise. It should translate what we have learned into a testable product definition. Our evidence comes from survey and signal synthesis. The product is the reusable cup return service. The primary user is the takeaway coffee customer. V1 is borrow, deposit, return, and refund. Rewards, AI features, and the carbon dashboard are explicitly out of scope. Notice how the PRD becomes shorter and clearer because the earlier discovery work did its job. On the product overview, the core definition is now visible in plain language. The product is the circular cup borrow and return service. The primary user is the takeaway coffee customer. The problem is not customers are unsustainable. It is that carrying and managing a personal reusable cup creates unnecessary friction. That wording matters. A respectful product definition focuses on the obstacle, not on blaming the user. It also makes it easier for the design and engineering teams to understand what the product is supposed to improve. Recording cue, point to product, primary user, and problem. This section is just as important as the feature list. Out of scope protects the learning speed. When a stakeholder asks for gamification, marketplace integration, social sharing, or advanced analytics, the team has a documented answer. Those are not part of V1 because they are not required to test the core hypothesis. This gives prioritization a reason, not just a ranking. The product manager can say, we are not rejecting the idea, we are sequencing it after the behavior has been validated. Recording cue, scroll to the MVP scope section, emphasize what is explicitly excluded. The PRD also defines how we will know whether the product worked. Percentage returned within 7 days tells us about user behavior. Repeat participation shows whether the experience is good enough to use again. Loss rate and cleaning cost tell us whether the operating model is viable. Disposable cups avoided and average reuse cycles tell us whether sustainability value is actually being created. Notice how these measures mirror the three outcome test. Success is not one vanity metric, it is a balanced view across use, business reality, and impact. Recording cue, pause on the success measure list and connect it to the three outcome test. A requirement is still abstract until we can picture the experience. So now we turn the product definition into a journey and a wireframe. The basic journey is order the drink, choose a reusable cup, pay the deposit, use the cup, find a return point, return it, and receive the refund. For the customer, that flow should feel simpler than carrying and managing their own cup. The journey map helps us look at the moments. The wireframe helps us see what, if anything, needs to appear on screen. The journey map makes each moment visible. Paying the deposit must feel like a temporary hold, not a fee. Using the cup should feel like a normal takeaway experience. Finding a return point needs to fit the customer's existing route. Returning the cup should make hygiene and acceptance obvious. Receiving the refund is a trust moment. This is why journey mapping is useful. The product is not experienced as a list of features. It is experienced as a sequence of moments, and one bad moment can undo the rest of the design. Recording cue, follow the journey from deposit through return and refund. Here the pain points and opportunities become explicit. Forgetting a personal cup, carrying a used cup, queue friction, uncertain refund, and hygiene doubt are the recurring problems. The opportunities map directly to them. Offer the borrow option at the till, make the refund immediate, allow cross-cafe returns, and make the wash standard visible. This is a strong design pattern. Every major product element should be able to point back to a real friction. If we cannot explain which problem a feature solves, it probably should not be in the first version. Recording cue, highlight pain points first, then show the matching opportunities. The wireframe designer is where we make the interaction concrete. At this stage, we are not trying to create polished visual design. We are asking a simpler question. What screens or touchpoints are actually necessary? Perhaps we need a borrow confirmation, a simple return location view, and a refund confirmation. If the flow can work with less screen interaction, even better. Wireframes are useful because they expose assumptions early. Something that sounds simple in a PRD can become obviously awkward when we try to place it into a sequence of interactions. Recording cue. Keep this brief. The point is making interaction visible, not designing every screen live. Now we move from one release to an evolution path. The roadmap is not a feature wish list, it is a sequence of learning gates. The pilot is 3 cafes with borrow and return and manual support. If that works, the validate stage expands to 20 cafes with a broader return network and a basic operations dashboard. Only after evidence holds do we consider scale across multiple brands, interoperability, and more advanced insights. Each stage should exist because the previous stage answered an important uncertainty. The roadmap canvas shows several things at once: work items, prioritization, roadmap adjacent decision support, and the ability to attach evidence and decisions to items. The key teaching point is the structure of the roadmap. We are not saying quarter 1 app, quarter 2 analytics, quarter 3 AI. We are saying first prove the behavior, then prove repeatable operations, then earn the right to scale. That is a much stronger way to roadmap sustainability products because the biggest risks are often behavioral and operational before they are technical. Recording queue, frame the roadmap as learning gates, then move to the specific pilot slash validate slash scale items. This is the pilot stage. 3 cafes, a borrow and return flow, and manual support. It is intentionally narrow. Manual support is not a failure here. It is a way to learn before automating every exception. If staff have to intervene in 30% of returns, that is valuable information. It tells us the process needs work before we scale. A pilot should expose the messy parts of the system, not hide them with premature automation. Recording queue. Select the pilot item and show its scope and evidence slash decision side panel. The validate stage expands the system only after the original assumptions hold. We move toward 20 cafes, a larger return network, and a basic operations dashboard because we now need to test repeatability. The question changes. In the pilot we ask, will the basic behavior work? In validation we ask, can the operating model work consistently across more locations? Different stage, different uncertainty, different product needs. Recording queue, select the validate item and emphasize expansion only after assumptions hold. Scale is a separate product problem. Multi-brand interoperability, more advanced insights, and broader network behavior are only worth solving after the core model is proven. This sequencing matters because scale can make a weak product fail faster. If return behavior is poor, adding more cafes increases inventory and logistics problems. If deposit trust is weak, a larger network multiplies customer complaints. Product maturity means knowing when not to scale. Recording queue, select the scale item. Reinforce that interoperability is a later stage problem. We now briefly move into the build handoff. The learning objective is traceability, not software engineering detail. The PRD should translate into a technical specification, which should translate into sprint-ready work, while the important product decisions remain visible. The same evidence that justified the product should continue traveling with the work. That way, engineering does not receive a disconnected list of tickets. It receives context about why the work matters and what outcome it is meant to test. This technical specification view is the bridge from product intent to implementation guidance. In a real project, it may contain architecture, data models, API contracts, technology rationale, security requirements, and test strategy. For the masterclass, the important point is that it is downstream of the product definition. Engineering should not have to rediscover the problem statement. The technical design exists to implement a product decision that has already been grounded in user, market, and viability evidence. Recording queue showed the same technical specification as the build handoff artifact. The sprint plan turns the product into buildable stories. Offer the reusable cup at the till, capture the deposit, record the return, process the refund, provide a return location list, and handle exceptions. But notice the learning gate at the bottom. The sprint is not complete simply because the stories are closed. We proceed to the 20 cafe validation stage only if return rate and loss assumptions hold. That is a powerful habit. Put the learning criterion next to the delivery plan so that shipping does not automatically become scaling. Recording queue, pause on the stories and then on the learning gate at the bottom. The decisions view gives the product a memory. We can see decisions such as defining circular cup V1 as a borrow and return service and proceeding with a 3-café pilot subject to return rate assumptions. These are more meaningful than a task history because they capture intent. Good governance is not about adding paperwork after the fact. It is about preserving why a consequential choice was made, what evidence supported it, and what would cause us to revisit it. Recording queue, point to the 2 circular cup decisions and their decided status. This context graph is one of the clearest views of traceability. We can see signals, feedback, PRD sections, roadmap items, and tool outputs as connected objects rather than isolated documents. The graph may look busy, but that is partly the point. Real product work has many relationships. The value is the ability to ask what evidence supports this roadmap item or which decisions came from this theme and navigate the chain. In sustainability, that lineage is especially useful when a claim, metric, or priority is challenged months later. Recording queue, do not explain every node. Use one example chain. Feedback, insight, PRD, roadmap slash decision. Now we return to where we started, outcomes and evidence. For user value, suppose 65% of cups are returned within 7 days. For business value, the loss rate remains below the 8% threshold. For sustainability value, suppose the program avoids 50,000 disposable cups, and then we attach the evidence, survey results, usage records, and return records. This is the moment when the product loop closes. We are no longer asking whether we shipped what we planned. We are asking whether the planned change actually happened. Outcome intelligence acts as a control tower for the decision to outcome loop. We can see reviews, action conversion, approval rates, outcome status, exceptions, and economic views. In the screenshot, some operational metrics are still incomplete, which is useful to notice. A dashboard should not pretend that missing evidence is success. The important behavior is that the system tells us where reviews are missing and which decisions still need an outcome review. Product learning only happens when someone closes that loop. Recording queue. Highlight missing reviews as well as positive outcomes. Reinforce that incomplete evidence stays visible. The outcome reviews make the three outcome model explicit. Circular Cup has a user outcome, a business outcome, and a sustainability outcome. Keeping them separate helps us avoid one-sided conclusions. A program can be popular but uneconomic. It can be economical but fail to deliver the intended sustainability benefit, or it can create impact but be too inconvenient to sustain participation. The product manager's job is to read all three together and decide what to improve next. Recording queue, point to the three recent outcome reviews: user, business, and sustainability. The decision record anchors the claim. Instead of saying Circular Cup is sustainable, we can say what we decided, what assumptions were attached to the decision, what happened after launch, and which records support the conclusion. That may sound like governance, but it is also good product practice. Evidence helps the team learn. It prevents a successful narrative from outturning the facts, and it makes it easier to identify which assumption failed when the outcome is weaker than expected. Recording queue, link the claim back to the decision record rather than reading the full decision list. The context graph now acts as evidence lineage. We can trace from raw feedback and signals to product artifacts, decisions, roadmap items, and outcome claims. This is where the six-part model becomes more than a teaching diagram. Challenge, person, problem, product, outcome, and evidence are linked in the operating environment. The aim is not to create a beautiful graph. The aim is to preserve the chain of reasoning so that the team can explain and improve the product over time. Recording queue, use the graph to reinforce lineage, not graph complexity. We can now look back at the Circular Cup project as a connected set of artifacts. Market validation, the journey map, PRD, wireframe, sprint plan, technical specification, roadmap, decisions, and outcome reviews are not separate deliverables for the sake of documentation. Each one captures a different stage of the product reasoning. Together they show how the sustainability challenge moved towards something a team could build and a business could evaluate. Recording queue, scroll the project outputs and name the lifecycle artifacts now connected. This final traceability view shows the full transformation. We started with a broad issue, disposable cup waste. We identified the customer and the inconvenience. We gathered evidence, formed a product insight, tested market and viability questions, defined a small product, mapped the experience, sequenced the roadmap, handed it into delivery, and then measured outcomes. That is the essence of sustainability product management. Not adding sustainability metrics onto a product after it is built, but designing the entire chain from intended change to provable result. Recording queue, use this as the proof of traceability close, linger briefly on the graph. This is the Masterclass recap screen. If you look at the circular cup project now, do not focus on the number of artifacts. Focus on the story connecting them. The product did not begin as let us build a reusable cup app. It began with a change that had to happen. The team then followed the evidence until a small, testable product became clear. That is the behavior I want you to take into the 5-day challenge. Start with the change, find the human friction, build only what is needed to test it, and measure what happened. Recording cue, end the software walkthrough here before returning to the 5-day challenge slides. The masterclass is designed to create confidence. The 5-day challenge creates practice. On day 1, you choose a sustainability challenge and the person whose behavior or decision matters. On day 2, you gather evidence about the real problem. On day 3, you define the minimum useful product. On day 4, you create the roadmap and build plan. On day 5, you define outcomes and evidence. The goal is not to produce a polished startup pitch in 5 days. The goal is to practice the sequence until it becomes natural. Challenge, person, problem, product, outcome, evidence. Segment 0 stays intentionally simple. The full program then makes each part professional. Foundations go deeper into customer discovery, problem framing, and metrics. Product decision modules cover strategy, prioritization, roadmaps, and requirements. Sustainability practice adds impact data, regulation, and evidence. Commercialization examines pricing, go-to-market growth, and life cycle economics. Leadership and AI modules look at portfolio choices, responsible scale, and modern product practice. The important point is that all of that complexity still sits on top of the same basic spine you have just used. I want to close with one idea. You do not start with a product. You start with a change that must happen. Then you identify the person who can influence that change, understand what makes the better behavior difficult, create the smallest useful product that can remove that friction, measure whether value improved, and preserve the evidence. That is what sustainability product management adds. A disciplined path from ambition to adoption, from adoption to outcome, and from outcome to proof. If you can make that change visible, you can move from sustainability ideas that sound good to products that people can actually use, organizations can operate, and teams can credibly improve. Quick close, the 6-part line challenge. What needs to change? Person, who must act? Problem, what makes action hard? Product, what should we create? Outcome, did value improve? Evidence, can we prove it? Closing line, you do not start with a product, you start with a change that must happen.